Rohan Khanna, Sunita Khanna, and Aarohi Mehta, three names tied by tradition, trust, and betrayal, would become the center of a story no one saw coming, a tale of love turned into deception and a bride's calculated revenge that shook an entire family to its core. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. Aarohi Mehta had always believed her life followed a clean and predictable path. She was born in Ahmedabad and moved to the United States with her parents during her teenage years. Growing up in New Jersey, she balanced two worlds with ease. At home, traditions were respected, and outside, she built a modern career in the tech industry. She worked as a software analyst, lived independently, and was known among friends for her organized habits and emotional control. By her early 30s, her family felt it was the right time for marriage, and Aarohi agreed, trusting the process that had guided her family for generations. Rohan Khanna entered her life through a well-connected family match. He was presented as a successful real estate consultant living in the USA, ambitious and family-oriented. His background checked every box that mattered to both families. His mother, Sunita Khanna, appeared confident and influential, someone who took pride in social status and financial strength. From the very beginning, Sunita played a central role in shaping the relationship, overseeing meetings, timelines, and future plans. Aarohi noticed the control, but mistook it for concern and experience. The engagement period moved quickly. Calls between Aarohi and Rohan were limited and often formal, but she assumed this was normal in an arranged setup. The families focused heavily on logistics, finances, and reputation. A civil marriage registration was completed in the USA to simplify future travel and legal matters. The grand wedding celebration was planned for India later that year. Photographs were taken, documents signed, and blessings exchanged. To the outside world, everything looked flawless. After the registration, Aarohi relocated to Rohan's apartment temporarily. The space felt unfamiliar, not because it was new, but because it carried a strange emotional distance. Rohan remained busy, often away for work, and Sunita maintained regular oversight through calls and instructions. Aarohi tried to adjust, reminding herself that new marriages required patience. She invested her savings into shared plans, trusting promises about future investments and joint assets. Friends congratulated her on securing a stable and respected match. Social media displayed smiling images that suggested happiness and security. Aarohi herself believed those images. She felt proud that her life appeared settled and admired. She ignored small discomforts, such as incomplete answers about finances or delays in introducing her to extended family. She believed clarity would come with time. What Aarohi did not realize was that this perfect beginning was carefully designed. Every step had been calculated long before she entered the picture. Behind the polished surface of traditions, documents, and rituals, a darker structure was already in place. The marriage was not the foundation of a future, but the opening move of a plan that would soon turn her life upside down. After the registration, daily life slowly revealed patterns that did not fit the image Aarohi had trusted. Rohan's schedule was unpredictable. Some days he returned home late at night, other days he did not return at all, claiming urgent work trips. His phone never left his hand, and notifications were quickly silenced or cleared. When Aarohi asked general questions about his work, the answers were vague and rushed. She told herself that real estate was demanding, and that trust was more important than suspicion. Money matters began to feel uncomfortable. Large expenses appeared without explanation, while small household needs were questioned closely. Sunita frequently reminded Aarohi about how much had already been spent on her and how responsibility now rested on her shoulders. Subtle pressure was placed on Aarohi to contribute more financially, framed as cooperation rather than obligation. Aarohi complied, believing shared responsibility would strengthen the marriage. Sunita's involvement increased with time. She controlled decisions from a distance, advising what to buy, how to behave, and whom to meet. Aarohi noticed that her own opinions were rarely considered. Every suggestion from Sunita came with a reminder of tradition, sacrifice, and family honor. Aarohi began to feel like a guest in her own life, but she remained polite and silent, hoping things would improve once the grand wedding took place. The apartment itself felt incomplete. Certain rooms were locked or avoided, and documents were kept hidden in drawers Aarohi was told not to open. When she offered to organize paperwork, Sunita discouraged it, saying it was unnecessary. Aarohi sensed boundaries that did not make sense in a marriage built on trust. Still, she chose not to push further, afraid of appearing difficult or suspicious. Social interactions also felt limited. Rohan avoided introducing Aarohi to friends or colleagues. Family gatherings were postponed with excuses. Aarohi noticed that invitations were rare, and when they did happen, she was presented more as a formality than a partner. Photos were carefully controlled, and public appearances were brief. She felt invisible despite being present. Sleep became difficult. Aarohi's mind replayed small moments that felt wrong but had no clear explanation. She questioned herself repeatedly, wondering if she was overthinking or struggling to adjust. She reminded herself of her upbringing, where patience was praised and compromise was expected. She convinced herself that stability required endurance. Yet the signs continued to grow. Rohan's behavior became colder and Sunita's tone sharper. Financial discussions turned one-sided. Aarohi noticed her own name appearing less in future plans. Still, she held on to hope, believing clarity would come with time and honesty would eventually surface. What Aarohi did not realize was that these were not random issues or normal adjustment problems. Each ignored sign was part of a carefully hidden truth. Every delay, restriction, and silence served a purpose. While Aarohi tried to protect the marriage, something else was being protected from her. The foundation she trusted was already unstable, and the next discovery would change the meaning of every moment she had tried so hard to excuse. The truth revealed itself on a quiet evening when Aarohi was alone in the apartment. Rohan had left early that morning, claiming an urgent property inspection, and Sunita had not called, which was unusual. The silence felt heavy. Aarohi decided to clean and organize the storage area, something she had been discouraged from doing before. It was not an act of rebellion, but a need to feel useful in a space that still felt borrowed. While sorting through old files stacked behind unused furniture, she noticed a folder marked with a different address, one she did not recognize. Inside were copies of legal documents, property papers, and court-related notices. At first, they seemed unrelated, but one detail caught her attention. Rohan's name appeared alongside another woman's name on a marriage certificate issued in California. The date on the document was only 3 years old. Aarohi felt a sudden numbness. She checked the document repeatedly, hoping she was mistaken. The names, dates, and registration numbers were clear. There was no mention of divorce or annulment. Her hands trembled as she searched further. More documents followed, including shared lease agreements, insurance records, and tax filings connected to the same woman. The evidence pointed to a life Rohan was still legally tied to. As Aarohi dug deeper, she found emails saved on an old laptop stored in the same box. The messages detailed financial planning, immigration strategies, and discussions about timing multiple marriages for monetary gain. Sunita's email address appeared frequently, offering guidance and instructions. There was no confusion or hesitation in those messages. Everything was calculated and deliberate. The realization hit slowly but painfully. Aarohi was not a wife who had been betrayed emotionally. She was a participant in a crime without her consent. The marriage registration was never meant to lead to a real partnership. It was designed to extract money, secure benefits, and maintain appearances. The planned wedding in India was nothing more than a distraction to buy time. Memories from the past weeks rearranged themselves in her mind. The guarded phone, the hidden rooms, the financial pressure, and the emotional distance all began to make sense. Even Sunita's control no longer looked like tradition, but surveillance. Aarohi understood that her silence had been mistaken for weakness. Fear followed the shock. Aarohi realized the danger of being trapped in a fraudulent marriage. Her legal status, finances, and reputation were all at risk. Yet alongside fear came clarity. She knew that confronting them directly would only give them time to erase evidence or turn the situation against her. Instead of panic, Aarohi felt a strange calm settle in. She copied every document, saved every email, and photographed every record. She restored deleted files and backed up data in secure locations. Each action felt like reclaiming control over her life. By the end of the night, Aarohi was no longer searching for answers. She had found them. The woman who believed in patience and adjustment was gone. In her place stood someone who understood the full scale of betrayal. The marriage was never real, but the consequences would be. From that moment, Aarohi stopped reacting to events. She began preparing for what would come next. The days that followed were marked by a careful stillness. Aarohi moved through the apartment as she always had, calm and observant, making sure nothing about her behavior raised suspicion. Rohan continued his routines, leaving early and returning late, unaware that the balance of power had shifted. Sunita resumed her frequent calls, offering instructions and reminders, but Aarohi responded with the same respectful tone as before. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inside, everything was different. Aarohi stopped thinking of herself as trapped and started thinking strategically. She organized the evidence she had collected, labeling files by date and relevance. Financial records were separated from personal documents. Immigration-related material was stored securely. She researched quietly, learning about fraud laws, bigamy statutes, and financial abuse cases in the United States. Each night, she read legal articles and case studies, understanding what actions triggered investigations and what mistakes victims often made. Aarohi avoided emotional reactions. She understood that anger would only cloud her judgment. Instead, she focused on timing. She knew that acting too quickly could alert Rohan and Sunita, giving them a chance to hide assets or shift blame. Acting too late could damage her own legal standing. The silence she maintained was not weakness, but a shield. She also reviewed her own financial situation. Joint accounts, shared expenses, and informal transfers were carefully documented. She realized how deliberately the system had been designed to slowly drain her resources. Seeing the patterns strengthened her resolve. She began adjusting her spending, quietly protecting what remained without drawing attention. Rohan noticed her compliance and assumed control was complete. Sunita, satisfied with Aarohi's silence, relaxed her pressure. This false sense of security worked in Aarohi's favor. The more comfortable they became, the less careful they were. New emails appeared. Transactions became sloppy. Assumptions replaced caution. Aarohi also prepared emotionally. She accepted that the life she imagined no longer existed. There would be no reconciliation or explanation that could undo what had been done. Letting go of hope freed her from hesitation. She stopped asking why it happened and focused only on what needed to be done next. At night, the apartment felt different. The walls that once felt cold now felt temporary. Aarohi began planning her exit, not as an escape, but as a controlled conclusion. She secured copies of her personal documents and kept essentials ready. Every step was calculated to avoid detection. By the end of the fourth day after the discovery, Aarohi had transformed silence into preparation. She was no longer reacting to deception, but anticipating its collapse. Rohan and Sunita believed they were safe behind years of manipulation and secrecy. They did not realize that the quiet woman in the same apartment had already dismantled their protection piece by piece. The storm was coming, and it would not announce itself with confrontation or emotion. It would arrive through systems, records, and consequences. Aarohi was ready to let the truth do the damage they never expected. The first day of action began like any other. Aarohi woke up early, prepared breakfast, and followed her usual routine. Rohan left the apartment without suspicion, carrying his phone and confidence with him. Sunita sent a short message reminding Aarohi about pending financial matters. Everything appeared normal, exactly as Aarohi intended. Beneath that normal surface, however, the plan she had built in silence finally moved forward. Aarohi started with finances, knowing money was the foundation of their control. She accessed the joint accounts using credentials she had legally obtained during the marriage registration. Over the past weeks, she had studied every transaction, every pattern, and every loophole. She transferred funds into a secure account under her sole name, supported by documented proof of her personal contributions. Each move followed legal boundaries, leaving no space for accusations of theft or misconduct. Next, she submitted detailed financial irregularity reports through official channels. The reports were factual, structured, and backed by evidence. They highlighted unexplained income, mismatched tax filings, and suspicious transfers connected to Rohan's business dealings. The information was enough to trigger automated reviews without revealing her identity. By afternoon, internal flags were raised across multiple institutions. As systems reacted, Aarohi remained invisible. She avoided unnecessary communication and did not check responses repeatedly. She understood that patience was part of the process. The impact was not immediate, but it was inevitable. By evening, alerts were issued, and accounts linked to Rohan's name were restricted pending investigation. Credit access was limited. Transactions failed silently. Rohan returned home frustrated and confused. Aarohi noticed the shift in his behavior without reacting. She observed carefully, mentally noting every sign of stress. Sunita's calls increased, filled with urgency rather than authority. Aarohi answered calmly, offering reassurance without committing to anything. The roles had subtly reversed. Later that night, Aarohi documented everything that happened that day. She noted timestamps, system notifications, and behavioral changes. This record was not emotional, but precise. She understood that accuracy mattered more than expression. Each detail added weight to what was already unfolding. The most important part of the day was restraint. Aarohi did not confront, accuse, or reveal knowledge. She let the systems work on their own. The power she used did not come from anger, but from preparation. The silence she maintained forced Rohan and Sunita to confront uncertainty, something they had never experienced before. By the end of the first day, the structure they depended on began to crack, not visibly but internally. Access was restricted, questions were raised, control slipped quietly from their hands. Aarohi slept that night with clarity, not relief. She knew this was only the beginning. The first move had been made without noise, without confrontation, and without mercy. What followed would not depend on her emotions, but on the truth she had already set in motion. The second day began with tension already filling the apartment. Aarohi sensed it in the rushed movements, the unfinished routines, and the constant checking of phones. Rohan's confidence from the previous weeks was gone, replaced by irritation and restlessness. Sunita's influence, once firm and commanding, now felt reactive. Aarohi understood that the pressure she had initiated was spreading, and it was time to direct it carefully. This day was not about speed, but exposure. Aarohi focused her attention on Sunita, knowing that the structure behind the fraud depended heavily on her control and planning. Using the evidence she had organized earlier, Aarohi submitted additional reports related to unreported income and suspicious charitable donations linked to Sunita's name. The records showed a pattern of money movement designed to avoid scrutiny, hidden behind religious trusts and community organizations. Each report was supported by documents, timelines, and clear connections. Nothing was exaggerated, nothing was assumed. The facts spoke for themselves. The agencies receiving the information were not told a story, they were given a map. Once submitted, Aarohi stepped back and allowed the system to respond as it was designed to do. By midday, Sunita's tone changed completely. The authority she once carried dissolved into panic-driven urgency. Calls were made, plans were shifted, and instructions were repeated with increasing desperation. Aarohi responded with the same calm politeness she had always shown. She offered help where it cost her nothing and avoided involvement where risk existed. The more Sunita tried to regain control, the more obvious it became that control was slipping away. Notifications and inquiries began arriving from institutions Sunita had relied on for years. Accounts were questioned, records were requested, long-ignored inconsistencies were suddenly visible. The image Sunita had carefully built within her social and professional circles started to fracture. Respect was replaced by suspicion. Rohan struggled to manage the fallout. The pressure from multiple directions overwhelmed him. Aarohi observed quietly, noting how quickly loyalty turned into blame under stress. The unity they once projected vanished. Their strength had always come from secrecy, and once that secrecy was challenged, nothing held them together. Aarohi spent the evening reviewing updates and documenting developments. She remained careful not to interfere further. The goal was never chaos, but accountability. She understood that the truth, once released, needed no further guidance. As night fell, the apartment felt smaller, heavier. Aarohi realized that fear had changed hands. The silence that once isolated her now isolated them. She felt no satisfaction, only certainty. This was not revenge driven by emotion, but a correction long overdue. The second day ended with reputations under question and foundations weakened. Sunita's power, built over decades, began collapsing in a matter of hours. Aarohi knew that the next day would no longer be about exposure, but consequences. The path forward was narrowing, and there was no return to the lies that once protected them. By the third day, the situation had moved beyond confusion and panic. It had entered a phase where consequences could no longer be delayed or redirected. Aarohi woke up knowing that this was the day everything would begin to collapse openly. The systems she had activated were now intersecting, turning separate inquiries into a single, unavoidable reality. Early that morning, official notices began appearing. Requests for verification, explanations, and documentation reached Rohan from multiple directions. What had once been scattered lies now had to stand together, and they did not. Conflicting records surfaced, exposing gaps that could not be explained away. His work history, marital status, financial claims, and immigration filings no longer aligned. The contradictions were too severe to ignore. Aarohi remained distant but alert. She observed how quickly Rohan's focus shifted from control to survival. The confidence he once carried was replaced by visible fear. His movements became rushed, and his decisions careless. He attempted to access accounts that were no longer available and contacted people who refused to respond. Every attempt to fix the situation only revealed more damage. As investigations deepened, Aarohi's earlier preparations proved critical. Through proper legal channels, past victims connected to Rohan's activities were identified and informed. Women from different states, each with similar experiences, submitted their own evidence. Patterns became undeniable. What once looked like isolated complaints now formed a documented history of deception and exploitation. Immigration authorities took notice as well. Discrepancies in marital status triggered immediate review. Visa conditions were suspended pending investigation, removing the protection Rohan believed he had secured. Travel restrictions followed, limiting his options. The walls closed in quickly. Sunita's attempts to intervene failed. Her influence no longer carried weight, and her own legal troubles made involvement risky. The alliance between mother and son fractured completely. Aarohi witnessed how blame replaced loyalty, how fear erased planning. Their strength had depended on coordination, and that coordination no longer existed. Throughout the day, Aarohi continued documenting developments. She kept records of notices, timelines, and procedural steps. Her role was no longer hidden, but it was still controlled. She understood that accuracy now mattered more than secrecy. By evening, authorities moved forward. Properties connected to fraudulent income were flagged and secured. Access to assets was restricted. Rohan's identity shifted from businessman to suspect. The transformation was swift and irreversible. Aarohi felt the weight of finality settle in. There was no celebration, no relief, only the quiet understanding that the truth had reached a point where it could no longer be contained. The life that had been built on deception was dismantling itself, piece by piece. The third day ended not with closure, but with inevitability. Arrest was no longer a possibility, but a matter of time. Aarohi knew that the final step would not be about watching them fall, but about stepping forward herself and ending the lie completely. The fourth day began quietly, almost peacefully. Aarohi woke up before sunrise, aware that this would be the last day she remained in the shadows. Everything she had done so far had prepared the ground. Now it was time to step forward and let her name replace anonymity. She gathered the final set of documents she had kept separate, the ones that connected every thread into a complete picture. There was no hesitation left in her movements. By mid-morning, Aarohi formally submitted her identity, along with the full evidence package she had already shared in parts. The shift was immediate. What had been an investigation driven by data now had a central witness. The marriage registration, once presented as legitimate, was reclassified as fraudulent. The absence of any legal dissolution from Rohan's previous marriage confirmed bigamy beyond doubt. The case moved from financial review to criminal prosecution. Authorities acted swiftly. Rohan was taken into custody on charges related to fraud, immigration violations, and illegal marriage. The confidence that once protected him offered no defense against documented truth. Sunita's involvement was formally acknowledged. Conspiracy charges followed, tied to financial manipulation and deliberate facilitation of the scheme. Her years of influence collapsed into liability. Aarohi did not attend hearings or seek attention. Once her statement was recorded and her role confirmed, she withdrew completely. She filed for annulment instead of divorce, legally erasing the marriage as if it had never existed. This single action stripped the fraud of its final cover. The story was no longer about a failed relationship, but about a planned crime. Within days, Aarohi relocated to another state. She closed accounts, changed routines, and removed herself from every environment connected to the past. There were no dramatic exits or public explanations. She chose disappearance over closure. Her safety and future mattered more than recognition. The case continued without her presence. Legal circles took note of how methodically the scheme had been exposed. Training materials referenced the investigation as an example of how silence, when paired with evidence, could dismantle long-running fraud. Aarohi's name appeared in records but not in headlines. For Aarohi, life slowly returned to structure. She focused on work, rebuilt her finances, and reclaimed control over decisions that had once been taken from her. The betrayal left scars, but it did not define her. She refused to let the crime shape her identity. The story ended not with revenge, but with correction. Those who believed manipulation guaranteed safety learned otherwise. Aarohi never sought justice through confrontation or emotion. She allowed systems to do what they were designed to do when given the truth. In the end, the most brutal part of the revenge was not punishment, but exposure. Lies survived only as long as silence protected them. Once that silence was broken with precision, everything else followed naturally. Aarohi walked away without looking back, leaving behind a story that would be told as a warning, not a tragedy.